now on a presentation that would use ICCS data from Linda Stas. Linda is a doctoral student at Leuven University, and she's going to talk about institutional trust. And this is a paper that she co-authored with a colleague from the University of Salzburg. SMG one, is it? Yes, yes. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Linda. I'm a PhD student. Maria Magdalena Isaac is also my supervisor, and Ellen Klaas as well. So as Maria already told you, I'm co-authoring this paper on the origins of trust in order and representative institutions among adolescents across 15 European countries with Dr. Joanna Siemens from the University of Duitsburg-Essen. And here we are addressing actually two major debates within the literature on political trust. So the first debate is concerning the dimensionality of political trust, concerning the objects of trust, so really the political trustees, and we can distinguish between the parliament, the government, police, the army, and so on. And there are many theoretical perspectives on this question. Some say that it's a one-dimensional attitude, that citizens just have one basic trust attitude, and then they will rate different indicators of trust based on that attitude similarly. Others say no, actually we can distinguish between the police and the government because they have different responsibilities, they have different roles, they have different employees actually. So we should also be able to distinguish between different attitudes of trust in these institutions. So there it is argued that we can distinguish between trust in order institutions, such as the police, and trust in representative institutions, such as the parliament, political parties, and so on. And then we have others still arguing that we also can have a multi-dimensional perspective on political trust, that we can also distinguish between local institutions, national institutions, and even supranational institutions. But this is also an empirical question, and there are several studies being done on this question, mostly on adult samples. And here there has been evidence has been found for a one-dimensional construct, but also for a two-dimensional construct. And we see that these differences in results mostly are due to the differences in an estimation method used, but mostly due to the chosen or the available indicators of trust. So, for example, there are studies that have found a one-dimensional construct, but they only included representative institutions in their measurement of trust, which makes it more difficult to distinguish with order institutions, of course. And this is also something that we looked into with Magda and with Ellen in work that is still ongoing. And we found evidence for a two-dimensional construct when we indeed also include measurements of order institutions in our construct. So we actually argue that overall, adults and adolescents, they can distinguish between order institutions and representative institutions, and this also is extrapolated towards a different kind of trust attitudes. So we built on this finding also for this study. And the second debate within the literature is about the origins of trust. And the first approach that is really discussing the origins or the determinants of trust in institutions, in political institutions, is the endogenous institutional approach. And this approach actually argues that trust is based on current government performance. It's really about what is the government doing now, what are public officials doing now, and citizens are taking that information to really decide whether they trust or don't trust the political institutions. And the critical citizen theory is actually part of this approach, and this argues that political knowledge or civic knowledge is actually the tool that citizens use to really scrutinize these institutions. So more knowledgeable citizens will be better equipped to really scrutinize these institutions and decide whether they can be trusted or not. But what about adolescents? They have limited first-hand experiences with the political sphere, and they're not permitted to vote. They don't pay taxes. They're mostly not allowed to become a member of a political party, for example. But still, when we are measuring their political trust attitudes, they still hold observable and stable political trust attitudes. And also when we look into the aggregate level of these attitudes, they show similar fluctuations as the attitudes of adult citizens. So how do they form their political trust attitudes then? So here comes the second approach in view. This is the exogenous cultural approach. And this argues that trust is actually formed from early childhood on through experiences with different socialization agents. And here we focused on two theories, the theory of social capital and procedural fairness theory. And these both theories actually have a spillover reasoning. So through interactions with peers, through interactions with teachers, students learn to trust these peers and these teachers, and then based on that trust they will also form expectations about how the political system really is treating their citizens. And they will actually learn to trust these institutions as well. So there is a spillover reasoning applied in this approach. So we are actually investigating the validity of both approaches, and we expect that particularly the cultural approach will be of explanatory value here. So this is our main research puzzle, the effects of endogenous and exogenous origins of trust in order and representative institutions among European adolescents. And we decide to focus on European adolescents because we really want to see whether their relationships are universal or context dependent. So we include multiple countries in our analysis. So what are our hypotheses? So first we argue that perceived positive interactions with peers positively affects trust in order and representative institutions across all contexts. So this is a universal way, this is a universal effect. This will affect students across all countries equally. And we expect the same with perceived fair and integer interactions with teachers. This will positively affect trust in order and representative institutions across all contexts. However, with regard to the effect of civic knowledge, we actually think that this is context dependent. So we argue that in contexts where the system is flawed and corrupt, there students with higher levels of civic proficiency will be better able to say, no, these institutions don't deserve our trust, so they should not be trusted. Whereas in educational systems where these institutions are working well, there more knowledgeable students will show more trust in these institutions. So here we find, we expect a cross-level interaction effect. So we used the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study of 2016, and we selected 15 liberal and electoral democracies in Europe, and our final sample is more than 50,000 students nested in more than 2,000 schools and in 15 countries. So our outcome variable is political trust, and we distinguish between trust in order and representative institutions. And these are our covariates. So we have three covariates on the individual level, so positive student relationships, and one example indicator is most students at my school treat each other with respect. And then we have procedural fairness perceptions. So whether students actually feel that they are treated fairly by their teachers, and one indicator is most teachers are interested in students' well-being. Most of my teachers really listen to what I have to say. And then civic knowledge was also measured. The corruption perception index was the variable we included at the country level, so that we can indeed look into the cross-level interaction effect of civic knowledge on both types of trust. And it's important, higher scores on this index mean lower levels of corruption. So that's important to mention. Our control variables are gender, socioeconomic status, and migration background. And this is our final conceptual model. So on the left hand we have our covariates, and so it's our individual level predictors and then our individual level controls. And then we have, on the right hand we have our individual level outcomes. And then we expect a cross-level interaction effect with country level corruption, which will also be, for which we also expect a direct effect. So higher levels of country level perception, country level corruption will also decrease trust in institutions. So in a first step, we use multi-group confirmatory factor analysis and alignment optimization to really create alignment scores for our two types of trust, and that are actually also approximately cross-country comparable. And then we apply 3 and 2 level linear regression. So the results. So this is actually our main table. Let's look into the first two variables. So positive student relationships and also procedural fairness perceptions, so fair treatment perceptions by their teachers, they both related positively with trust in order and representative institutions. Regarding civic knowledge, we did not really expect a direct effect, but I do want to mention it. We found a positive association between civic knowledge and trust in order institution, and this was significant. But we found a negative association with trust in representative institutions, though this was not statistically significant. Still interesting to mention. And then regarding the cross-level interaction effect, we found a positive cross-level interaction effect, meaning that the association between civic knowledge and trust in order and representative institutions becomes more positive when corruption is less prevalent. So indeed, more sophisticated students become better at revoking their trust when corruption is more prevalent in a country. We also looked at some country-specific effects. So here we conducted 2-level linear regression. And here you can see the corruption perception index ranking. So this means that higher scores are lower levels of corruption. And so, for example, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, so the Nordic countries, they score the highest. And then we have Central, Eastern, and Southern European countries, such as Bulgaria, Croatia, Italy. They score actually the lowest on this CPI ranking. So looking into trust in order institutions, so the police, the army, there we mostly find positive associations. And these positive associations are also mostly found in countries that have lower levels of corruption in these institutions. The only negative association was found in Bulgaria, and this country also scored the lowest in terms of corruption. So the highest level of corruption was present there. But we saw something different happening with trust in representative institutions. So there, actually, we mostly found non-significant results in most countries. So indeed, trust in representative institutions does not seem to differ much across different levels of civic proficiency. But when countries are actually below a certain level of corruption, then we are starting to see differences arising. So indeed, we see that students with higher levels of civic knowledge, they are more likely to revoke their trust. And this was, for example, in Bulgaria again, but also in Italy, there we saw a negative association arising, and then also in other Central Eastern European countries. And here also, just to show you visually that trust increases when corruption decreases. And it's in both types of trust. So can we confirm our hypotheses? So yes, the first one is definitely confirmed. We saw positive and significant associations between perceived positive interactions with peers and both types of trust across all contexts. And the same goes with the perceived fair and integer interactions with teachers. this also showed positive significant associations with both types of trust. And the final one we could also confirm. So indeed, the effect of civic knowledge on both types of trust depends on a country's level of public sector corruption. It becomes more positive when corruption is less prevalent. So what do these results mean? So first, by focusing on young adolescents, we actually show that citizens don't really need first-hand experience with political officials, or they don't really need formal ties with political institutions to really assess whether they trust these institutions. And we indeed show that already from a young age, students can really indicate a certain level of trust in institutions. So therefore, the foundations for political trust seem to be laid during adolescence. And we also find that schools and teachers should be informed about the important role they play in this regard. So while the acquired knowledge helps students judging institutions critically, their experience of positive peer relationships and being fairly treated by their teachers seem to be vital for the formation of their political trust. So this is what our main conclusion. We also argue that teachers, in a way, function as street-level bureaucrats, so they give students their first-hand experiences with democratic rules, with democratic procedures, and students can then take this information with them outside of the school and also develop expectations about the functioning of higher-level political authorities when in contact with citizens. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, we also wanted to address the debate on cultural and institutional approaches to origins of trust. And we want to address this debate. We find evidence for both approaches. And so fundamentally, it is likely that during adolescence, political trust originates primarily from experiences outside the political realm. But when one becomes older and when you gain citizenship rights and your contact with governmental actors increases, then political trust will also be likely informed by these contacts and by interactions with these institutions. So that's our final conclusion. Yeah, thank you.